Hello lovelies, yes I'm aware that it is not a Wednesday or a Sunday and yet still I have released a video. That's because I wanted to try something a bit new and to talk about a case that has been really bothering me at the moment in the press. I'm sure a lot of you in the UK will have heard about it. It's about the maths teacher Rebecca Joynes. And the reason that this case really intrigues me is because of the gender bias that is afforded women when it comes down to child abuse cases, which I'm going to expand on a little bit further during this video. It hasn't actually got a full result yet. We don't know what her sentence is going to be, but I guarantee it is going to be a strict and stern one for lots of very good reasons. But let's talk about this case. Let's talk about Rebecca Joynes. Rebecca Joynes was born in 1994. She's a former maths teacher in the UK. She's faced a major court case because of the fact that there were allegations made towards her of sexual misconduct with her students, and it blew up in the UK, it really did. Her case has garnered widespread media attention, and mainly that's down to the nature of the accusations, but also some of the shocking details that have emerged during the trial. Now, any teacher in the UK has to go through training in safeguarding and child protection. Safeguarding means that when you're working with vulnerable young people or disabled people or individuals who may have certain issues because of their age, such as the elderly, you are going to be somebody who acts as a protector. So you act within a protective mechanism of these individuals to ensure that if they're not being taken care of, where they should be being taken care of, that you can put in place the protections that are essential so that they are indeed protected. When it comes down to child protection, that means that we're looking for things like fingertip bruising, we're listening to conversations that children are having with their peers, we're listening for any rumours that might be being spread by their peers that can indicate there are problems at home, and we're also looking obviously for children coming forward and actually identifying that they are victims of abuse. And it's absolutely paramount as a teacher that you are firstly trained and that you are secondly completely committed to child protection and safety. And when there is an abandonment of this, and in this case that's exactly what we're talking about, a massive abandonment of the safeguarding of children, it is blindsiding. When you add to that equation that we're talking about a female who was doing the abuse. Now let's be clear, women abuse children, women molest children, women kill children. In fact, when it comes down to serial killers, for example, they are more likely as females to practice infanticide, the killing of children, than their male counterparts, because that's how women kill. We kill differently to men. Nonetheless, it is unusual for us to hear cases where teachers are female who are abusing their students. I would say there is an uptick in these cases. I'm hearing more and more about that. And maybe that's down to the fact that young people are starting to understand that when a female is abusing you, it is still abuse. Because we have to remember that children are brought up with a stereotype and often see men as the predators in a sexual way, and that women are individuals who are victims. So that mindset can mean that if a adult female is being inappropriate sexually towards a younger person, they sometimes don't really pick up on the fact that that's abuse. The more that we hear about this in the press, the more that people talk about this in the press, the more they read about it in the papers, the more they see it in videos described on things like TikTok, the more they are alert to the fact that actually this is abuse. I'm being abused. And that is probably why we are seeing more individual victims come forward and say, this female has been abusing me. But when that happens, because we are still talking about a major divide between the statistics where men abuse and women abuse, it does feel entirely shocking when you realise that someone who to all intents and purposes looks like peaches and cream, looks like someone whose butter wouldn't melt in their mouth because they're very attractive, and at the end of the day you look at them and think, well, you could have anybody. What on earth are you doing attacking children in this case? Well, the truth is, because people who are child molesters don't wear a label saying, I'm a child molester. It's something within their makeup. It's something about their predilection. It's something about them being broken fundamentally inside. That's what makes them a child molester, not the way that they look. And often, if we see somebody and they look good, we think, well, they must be good. It's exactly the same, I'll be honest about this, when there have been good-looking child predators. So when you have heard about men of 35 having sexual relationships with 13-year-olds, and it happens to be that they look really attractive, the conversations that you hear about those relationships are shocking, where fundamentally people are saying things like, well, he's really good looking, I'm sure that she was interested in him, and so on and so forth, totally misstepping and underestimating the reality of what's playing out, which is child molestation. We are not talking about it being a looks-driven issue. We're talking about it being a fracture in the character, personality, mindset, and culture of the individual carrying out this kind of abuse. And that's why this case has provoked so much reaction. Now, Rebecca Joynes, when you look at her, is very attractive. She's got incredibly supportive parents. I feel a deep sense of empathy and sympathy for her parents. They are Stuart Joynes and Mel Joynes. They run a tea room on the Wirral. They are super supportive human beings, genuinely. They have been supportive throughout her life. There is nothing outstanding or outlandish about what has occurred to Rebecca in her past that would frame us as thinking, well, this young person has grown up in all these problematic experiences and this is why her behaviour is so incorrect and so badly adjusted. That's not what we're looking at here. She has got the most supportive environment, and that's very clear because you see her parents literally coming to court to support her every single day. So they have been present in her life. She certainly has a fabric and foundation of what we expect to see in well-adjusted human beings, and yet, for whatever reason, the fracture exists and she has betrayed her position. She's betrayed safeguarding, and most importantly, she has betrayed the trust and the safeguarding of the children that she was employed to protect. Now, the way that Rebecca Joynes got into teaching was through the Teach First programme. So essentially, initially, she earned a degree in sports and exercise science. And she actually started teaching at a secondary school in Salford. Now, a lot of you listening to this won't know what Salford is. It's a place in Greater Manchester. It's a place that I worked for a good few years in my career. I had the great privilege of working with travel minority groups in Salford and also with young people who were disaffected from school. I will tell you that it is one of those community areas where you really will find genuinely good, salt-of-the-earth people, but there are issues. There are issues economically, people struggle financially, and there is a massive divide. So you have these new housing estates happening, you've got this big high-rise, that media city with the upwardly mobile middle classes, and then you actually have some really big estates which are challenged by their economy, they're challenged by unemployment, they're challenged by social issues, and therefore you have this big mix of people, and fundamentally that works well most of the time, but there are understandably some issues because of those disparities that I've just mentioned. So she will be teaching at a school which is host to a lot of different types of student, and some of those students will seem a lot more street smart and worldly wise than others. It goes without saying. That is the landscape of the area. So she starts teaching in Salford, as I said, and prior to what we're going to talk about today, she had actually been in a really long-term relationship. She'd been in a long-term relationship, and that relationship, to all intents and purposes, it ended in a really messy way. She had been with her partner since the age of 15, and they were together 9 years. That's a long time. And whilst we are not going to for 1 minute look for any excuses, we're not going to look to mitigate any of her actions whatsoever, I can't help but just fixate a little bit on the fact that she got with her long-term partner at the age of 15. And the reason why that strikes me is because of the particular young people that she went for and the age range that they are within. We'll explore that a little bit more when I get to that point. So she has been developing through her teenage years and into her young adult years, and indeed to her mid-adult years, as a partner in a long-term relationship with a guy called Tom Bates. Now, during the trial, Tom Bates actually described their relationship as being relatively problematic. It was strained, and he said that she was often very jealous, she was very controlling, she was very insecure, and it's subjective. I'm not going to take that as verbatim. We all know that an ex-partner is likely going to say things that are not necessarily the nicest things about us because they're seeing it from their point of view. And I do appreciate there are people out there who genuinely split up from their relationships and do it in a really amicable way. And they're very grown up about it and everyone gets on still. But that doesn't tend to be the shape and form of most of us mere mortals' experiences. And in this case, the fact that he's saying that she was jealous, she was controlling, she was insecure, That could be true. Equally, he could be somebody who made her jealous, made her feel a lack of control, and made her feel very, very insecure in her nature. So it's swings and roundabouts as to whose perspective is correct here. He said that she would regularly demand to know his whereabouts, and that in itself contributed to the tension between them. On one level, we could say, well, that's what coercive controllers do. They demand to know your whereabouts. Equally, a lot of us in relationships kind of want to know where our partner is. It's just one of those things. Where are you? Why is it a big deal telling me? So it could just be that they're at different points in their relational experience. He's maybe not as committed and wanting to settle down as she is. She is demanding to know where he is because she feels a lack of security because he isn't necessarily committing to the relationship in the way she wishes for him to commit. So we can't read too much into that scenario, but what we can say is in court, that's what he's saying. He's suggesting that there were issues and tensions in their relationship, and that played out and likely contributed to the end in their relationship. She was accused of some very serious offences, and she's been found guilty of those. They involved sexual misconduct with 2 of her teenage students. This is while she was indeed employed as a maths teacher, and she was arrested initially in October 2021. Now, it is going to be terrifying for anybody to find themselves in the line of fire regarding these kind of allegations. And even though we're talking about somebody who's been predatory towards children, we can understand that on a psychological level, she probably wasn't expecting it. Again, we'll go into that a little bit more later on. So no doubt it makes sense that she would have indeed been absolutely terrified when the police came knocking. And there had been a full police investigation that had occurred before they made that arrest. And this is because somebody who we'll refer to as Boy A, because obviously these young people have not been identified for their own safety. They deserve anonymity. It's very, very hard to be an abuse victim, and to have the press all over this is going to make it even more difficult if you are physically identified and people know who you are. There'll be lots of people in Salford who know exactly who these boys are, and that is going to be challenging enough for them. Again, we'll dig deeper into that a little bit further in this video. So they do the police investigation. The reason for this is that Boy A's mother reports her concerns to the school. She clearly has good reason to speak to the school and to ask them what's gone on and why she has the fears that she has about the relationship she feels is inappropriate with her son and this teacher. The school then do the right thing, and you would be amazed at how many schools don't. I'm not saying it's common practice in the UK, but I'm hearing a huge amount of failed action taken by American schools regarding these kind of cases, some of which I'm going to cover on this channel. So she goes and speaks to the school. They then do the right thing. They involve the authorities. And at this point, they start investigating the apparent inappropriate relationships between Joynes and the students who are identified. Now, she does get bail after she's arrested, but that bail obviously stipulates that she has no unsupervised contact with any minors. The charges were big. So she was charged with 4 counts of sexual activity with a child. So those charges related to her sexual involvement with 2 teenage boys. They're referred to in the court case as Boy A and Boy B. Boy A was 15 years of age when the relationship began, and Boy B, he was also 15 when their relationship started, but continued after he turned 16. Now, this is where I just want to introduce a concept of mine regarding why she's attracted to 15 and 16-year-olds. By the way, we are not defending her in any way, shape or form. Quite the contrary. When I look at a 15-year-old young boy, all I can think is, I hope they're okay. Life's pretty challenging at 15 and 16. There is not a 15 or 16-year-old boy on this planet that I would find attractive. In fact, I'm going to be really honest with you, and I'm sure that women of my age and men of my age who are listening to this get it. I think every young person is beautiful. I look at them and I think, I hope you appreciate yourself. I don't care whether they're big, small, overweight, underweight, whether they've got gorgeous skin or they're covered in acne. It doesn't matter. There is something just so lovely about youth and they don't appreciate it, and I want for them to appreciate it. And I know that that's because within me there is that maternal nurture where I hope that young people who are struggling with their self-identity and worth and insecurity, I hope that they can at some point earlier than most realize just how beautiful they are, because youth just exudes possibility. And so when I look at young people, it's from that real standpoint of being an elder even. Somebody who looks at them and thinks, I hope you have the world and I hope you understand you're worth the world, because it's so challenging when they're 15 and 16. And the idea that anyone could feel any kind of sexual intention or attraction towards people of this age, one, obviously concerns me as a professional, but also it concerns me on a visceral and cerebral level because it just feels so diabolically wrong. It feels like an abandoning of who we are as grown-ups, as adults. But having said all of that, I can't help but be connected to the fact that she met her long-term partner when she was 15, because that will have been the last time she was looking around at people that she found attractive. And indeed, she will have been attracted to the partner that she ended up with all the way through to when she was in her mid-20s. So the identification she has with relationships begins at that point. So it intrigues me as to whether that's where the fracture begins for this unsuitable attraction, this inappropriate attraction, where she's looking at where she began relationally, and that's when she's 15. And therefore, as she has grown through her relationship that's become very messy and very strained and very challenging, she identifies with the time of being happy back when she was 15 and back when he was 15. And she pulls that through psychologically to an attraction base to what she would consider a non-threatening time with a loving partner. And so she connects and anchors with an attraction level that's highly inappropriate, but that connects, as I said, with a point in time where relationships felt safe for her and where she felt that she was somebody of meaning and worth to a partner. Like I said, we're not mitigating her actions. We're just trying to track back and look at where this sparks fire, essentially. Now, she's also charged with 2 counts of sexual activity with a child by a person in a position of trust. Clearly, she's a teacher. She's there to protect, not to exploit. And these charges basically emphasise that as a teacher, she holds this position of authority, she holds this position of trust over her students, and she abused that trust. She sexually engaged in activities with them, and that is a total abandoning of her safeguarding duty. Now, when it came down to the prosecution's case, I would say it was really strong. So the prosecution's case against Rebecca Joynes was meticulously crafted, and the crafting was all about demonstrating the abuse of power and the abuse of trust as her of a teacher by engaging in sexual activities with the 2 young students. Now, Joe Alman, that was the lead prosecutor, presented a really compelling narrative, and that compelling narrative was not circumstantial. It was supported by physical evidence, by witness testimonies, and with the context of the relationship between Joynes and the boys, who, as I said, are referred to as Boy A and Boy B. So let's just go through the key elements of the prosecution's case, what made it so strong. So first of all, initiation of inappropriate relationships. So with Boy A, the prosecution argued that Joynes initiated contact with Boy A by basically giving him part of her phone number as a puzzle, which you're a maths teacher, you can make sense of that. But if we think about the long-term goal, it's about him getting and guessing her number, which is highly inappropriate. That's just not acceptable in a teacher-student relationship. So he works it out. Of course he works it out. He's going to. He's being a good student. She's giving him a puzzle. He's going to solve it. She's probably flirting with him. That's going to be interesting to a young man. They're at a very challenging point. Young teenage boys, when they're 13, 14, 15, they are excited by the idea of sexual liaison. It is part of growing up. That's why they need people like us to protect them, because they can't consent, they are confused, they are driven by natural instincts, and that means that they are not necessarily considering the reality of what is happening to them when they are in that line of fire. So he solves the puzzle Then he starts engaging in further communication with her on Snapchat. And boy A's testimony basically said that after he'd solved the puzzle, they got very flirty in messages, and this led then to evidence of sexually explicit messages, which is beyond offensive. Bear in mind, guys, we are talking about an adult female teacher with a 15-year-old boy who she was teaching, and she is literally sending sexually explicit messages to him and receiving them from him. And bear in mind, we have very stringent rules and regulations in the UK. The making and dissemination of child images of a sexual nature is illegal all the way up until 18. So she knows this because she's been trained in this. And that again speaks to a mindset that is fractured, because she should automatically recognise the severity and seriousness of what she is doing in that moment. But this is what's going on. She's sending sexually explicit messages between herself and boy A, and the prosecution said that Joynes then invites boy A to her apartment, at which point they engage in sexual activities. And to be honest, guys, again, this is not circumstantial. They found boy A's semen on Joynes's bed sheets. That corroborates his accounts of their encounters. And also, just throwing it out there, I don't think any of us have to think very hard to imagine how it arrived there. I'm not imagining any of us are sitting there going, well, maybe he went round, was doing a maths lesson and then thought, just going to pop into the bedroom and, I don't know, ejaculate on some sheets. That's not what any young man is going to do. And no matter what defence is put up, it's ludicrous. The only reason his bodily fluids would be on her bedsheets is if he has been present in a sexual manner. Again, with an adult female. Now for boy B, the prosecution, again, they outline basically a very similar pattern of behaviour. The relationship begins with flirtatious Snapchat messages, and the prosecution in this case asserted that their sexual relationship started when boy B was 15 and continued after he was 16. And again, the evidence includes explicit messages along with boy B's testimony, which literally describes their encounters. And the prosecution even went on to highlight an incident which is truly horrendous. That's all I can say. It shouldn't be horrendous because usually this would be a happy thing, but it isn't. So the incident that they describe in court is where Joynes reveals her pregnancy to boy B. That's right, the pregnancy that he's responsible for, a teenage boy. And she actually did this using a baby grow labelled Best Dad. And this was apparently during a planned date night at her flat. That's right, I really did say all that. Joynes, an adult maths teacher, has got this young boy to her home, has created, I don't know, some kind of TikTok video-esque thing where she reveals her pregnancy to a child during a date night. Can you just take a breath and imagine what that young man is thinking? Firstly, he's the victim of abuse. It probably hasn't computed. So often young men believe that they're part of the relationship. They believe that they're an active participant, and that is what's so wholly grotesque about these kind of connections, because they blame themselves. They think, well, I'm complicit. I wanted it. I liked her. She was attractive. I asked for it. All of these things that are totally irrelevant, and in the long term usually fail to stay in that mindset. What tends to happen is over time, as the young person grows and starts to look back and reflect and see the manipulation and see the coercion and see what really happened, at that point their sense of self and safety disintegrates. It may not be at origin. They may, at the moment where they are having the relationship, feel that it's actually a positive experience in their life, but that does not stand the test of time on the whole. We're talking about future collateral damage. And in this case, a teenage boy who has now become a father. A child, having a child with a teacher who was indeed meant to protect that child. It is So highly manipulative of her. And yes, I know some people will say, well, highly emotionally immature as well to do that. That she's playing some kind of fantasy where they can actually be in a consenting relationship and they can actually be parents to a child together, even though she has abandoned every point of trust that she was afforded the position of. That somehow still she is believing that there is some kind of rational connection and to some degree potentially long-term connection within the relationship. It makes no sense. Equally, we see with paedophiles and child molesters that they often have that mindset that they are in an actual consenting relationship with a child. You hear it time and time again. And they are actually annoyed when they have that mindset challenged because they cannot understand that if they are not physically hurting the child, if the child seemingly is engaging in a consensual manner, they believe it's because the child wants it, not because they have been manipulated and coerced and groomed into a position where this is how they believe they are meant to act. In fact, one of the most confusing things that abuse victims have to deal with is the ramifications of the guilt they feel. It's not their guilt, but they feel it anyway because they built these connections with the abuser. They liked the abuser, they cared for the abuser, they found the abuser attractive, they enjoyed the time that they had with the abuser, they liked the things the abuser brought into their life, the way that they validated them, the way that they noticed who they were as an individual. They don't realize that that is what abusers do. They groom you. They confuse you. They make you think that you want what's happening. We're talking about lots of paedophile child molesters who do not use aggression and violence towards the individuals they sexually molest. We're talking about those who play the longer game. They get their trust, they buy them nice things, they lie to them about their relationship, they tell them how much they love them, they use kindness and a sickly sweet sadistic quality to the way that they act to ensure that that child believes that maybe they do in fact want this relationship, or even when they don't want the relationship, as in the sexual side of it, they don't want to betray the person who's been so nice to them. That's where the confusion begins, middles and ends, and that's why abuse is so dangerous. The second thing the prosecution brought forward was the abuse of position and trust. They emphasised that Joynes as a teacher was absolutely in a position of trust. She had a duty to protect her students, so by engaging in those sexual activities with minors, she grossly abused this position. You can imagine that the jury were all nodding their heads at that moment in time. The prosecution presented evidence that Joynes failed to shut down inappropriate communications and instead encouraged them. So we've probably all been in scenarios where we spent time with younger people. I spent my career for over a decade working with them. I had lots of text messages of my clients. At no point, if one of those clients had tried to engage in inappropriate banter, would I have responded, because it blurs the boundaries and it means that my job is redundant. I have to let them know that I care for them and that my care is a good care, not an abusive care, not an exploitative care, and that I know what is better than what they on the whole may know at that point in time because of the fact I am grown and I am professional and I am schooled and experienced. I would shut it down in a caring, compassionate way. I would not be angry with somebody texting me something inappropriate, but it would be a useful learning tool and it would help them to understand those very important boundaries. She did the opposite. So the prosecution are basically able to portray her as predatory. They're basically able to say, listen, you took advantage of the students' youth, of the students' vulnerability. They also brought forward a lot of evidence of manipulation and emotional control. So they were able to very aptly point out that Joynes actually bought expensive gifts for boy A, which is straight from the groomer's handbook. This included a £350 Gucci belt. They actually had footage of that at the Trafford Centre in Manchester. And this is all about making him feel cool, making him feel good, making him feel special. Young people don't have access to £350 Gucci belts. So that's demonstrating the level that she's manipulating him and the lengths that she's going to go to maintain these illicit relationships. And then they talked about the emotional impact on the victims, and it's massive. So the prosecution were able to highlight the massive emotional turmoil that were experienced by both boy A and boy B in particular, in fact. He described feeling absolutely betrayed, manipulated, especially when he learned that Joynes was pregnant. the fact that he had no option in her carrying on with that pregnancy, that she was going to go ahead and make him a father, whether he was ready for it or otherwise. And she's an abuser. And now she's controlling him further because she's having a baby. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate there could be a strong likelihood that he wanted that child, and babies are amazing and they bring a great deal of beauty into people's lives, whether they're wanted or unwanted. Believe me, the moment they're here, you will connect with the fact that they are incredible and that you will devote yourself to that child. But that's not where he would have been when he found out that his teacher was pregnant, giving him a baby grow, basically saying best dad, when he didn't even know that he was in the line for being a dad. So he knows now that there is a reality to what happened to him. There is an abuse reality, and there is a baby that will grow into a young person, that will grow into an adult that belongs to him genetically, and he had no knowledge of it, no power over it, and most importantly, that child is evidence of what happened to him. So that emotional manipulation, again, underscored that predatory nature of Joynes, and that's what the prosecution are pushing. Then we've got the pattern of deceptive and secretive behaviour. So they underscored as the prosecution that Joynes absolutely knew it was wrong, that those relationships she knew would be considered completely inappropriate and dangerous for her career and for her actual freedom because they were illegal. So she wanted to keep the relationships secret. So the prosecution brought out to the jury that both of the boys were told to keep their encounters secret, that Joynes communicated with them via Snapchat. Bear in mind that Snapchat is a platform where messages can be deleted. They're actually harder to recover. I don't have Snapchat because I'm 197 years old, 198 in 6 months' time. But the point is that I don't have it because of my age. I wouldn't use it. I've never used it, but my kids use it all the time. It is more of a young person's platform, and she is using that because she believes those messages will just be deleted, and that makes her feel safe. Now, this secrecy was presented by the prosecution of evidence of her awareness of the wrongdoing and, of course, of her attempts to avoid detection. She wouldn't have had any doubt in her mind at any point that what she was doing was not wrong. She knows because she's trained. Then they also had the contradictions and inconsistencies they presented. So they said, listen, Joynes' statements and actions differ. So Joynes claimed that her relationship with boy B only became sexual after he turned 16 and left school, as if that is an excuse anyway. Sorry, the moment that a grown-ass woman, a professional, a trained teacher says, oh, you know what? Yeah, we were kind of speaking to each other before he was 16 and then we had sex once he was 16, you are a wrong 'un. There is no defending it. It is not acceptable on any level. I know it becomes legally acceptable at 16 and people will say, well, at that point he can consent. The point is he was being groomed prior to that age. So even if they did have sex at 16 and not before, it had happened over a period of grooming to that point. And the prosecution did a very good job of labouring the point that the relationship had indeed begun earlier. They presented testimonies and evidence that contradicted her claims, and this inconsistency was basically used to challenge her credibility and honesty before the jury. The last thing you want to do as a defendant is be shown to have contradictions in your defence and to also have out and out lies. It does not go well for you. Now, when it came down to the defence's strategy, what they did was they focused basically on disputing the claims of the prosecution and providing a context that basically painted Joynes as the vulnerable individual who made poor decisions due to personal and emotional challenges, which I think is a stretch. I think the defence had a very hard job with respect, and I think it showed in the defence of Rebecca Joynes. So the key elements of the defence's case were, so they out and out firmly denied that any sexual activity had happened between Joynes and boy A. She said, look, I did communicate with boy A through Snapchat and through meeting him, but in a non-sexual way. There were no sexual encounters that took place. The defence suggested that boy A's testimony was basically unreliable and was influenced by teenage bravado and exaggeration. We can all acknowledge teenage boys may at times exaggerate things that they've done with the opposite gender when they've been in sexual experiences with them. But we are talking about a teacher who's still meeting some young person outside of school hours. That's inappropriate. That's very suspect. Why is she sending Snapchat messages to him? Why is she meeting him full stop? That gives enough suspicion to me to mean that the boy should be given a level of weight to his accusations. Also, it's not just boy A, is it? It's boy B. Therefore, she definitely has a particular predilection for teenage boys in a sexual way. She got pregnant by one of them. The defence also said that the timing of boy B is why she shouldn't be in court. So Rebecca Joynes said, well, yeah, I did have a relationship with boy B, but it was only sexual after he left school. It was only sexual after I'd groomed him at school to a point where he was just 16, when I then had sex with him when it was legal, even though I'd groomed him all that time and then got pregnant by him. I mean, it's a really poor defence, but that's what they're saying. They're like, no, boy A just made it up. Boy B, you know, it's a little bit icky that she decided to have a relationship with a 16-year-old boy that she taught, but hey, these things happen. He'd left school. She was no longer in a position of trust, so what's the problem? So the defence argued that the timing meant that no laws were broken regarding sexual activity with a minor whilst in a position of trust. Joynes claimed that he was legal when she was sleeping with him, therefore she disputed the prosecution's timeline. But that's very convenient. Oh yeah, it looks really bad, but you've just all got the timings wrong. They also brought in, as a defence, her vulnerability and flattery, which again is a poor defence. If you've got a jury and they're adults, they know how your men act. That's what a jury's going to do. They're not just going to listen to the evidence. They're going to take their own personal experiences, they're going to put it on a plate and they're going to see whether it tastes any good, and this does not taste good. The defence tried to portray Joynes as this vulnerable person who just made regrettable decisions due to loneliness and instability emotionally. Now just think about this. If there was a man in court being tried for the sexual molestation and rape of girls under the age of 16, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me that any defence lawyer would stand up and go, well, you know what? He's just in a situation where he felt flattered and emotionally vulnerable, and he was looking for somebody to make him feel good. And this predatory 13, 14, 15-year-old girl did that very, very effectively, aside from the other one who just made it up. That didn't happen at all. That's what is being pushed. And I'm telling you now, that's because she is a blonde-haired, attractive female. That's why this narrative is being pushed. So this idea that she's vulnerable and emotionally unstable, and therefore somehow she's the victim. That's what they're saying, that somehow she's the victim. And that the long-term relationship that involved a difficult breakup was also the reasoning. And the isolation she felt during COVID-19 as well, they pushed that narrative because, you know, that's going to be effective. Just going to throw it out. Pretty poor defence, because actually during the COVID-19 pandemic, no matter what your view was on it, you weren't actually allowed to visit people at other addresses and have sex. That was one of the rules that they said had to exist. So either way, she's doing things that are breaching her position, and also at the time, the issues around what she was meant to be doing during the COVID period. But she says, listen, the reason I was doing this is I was flattered by the attention from the boys. Again, could you imagine in court, a man in the dock, and he's going, well, okay, it looks really bad that these children are saying these things about me, but the truth is, I was just vulnerable and I felt so flattered by them. And that's why I ended up having sex with them, because I was flattered by them. Again, she's in the victim state. She was saying that the attention from the boys was just really alluring and that she, quote, caved in. So yeah, she caved in to their advances. Can you imagine that? Let's just go back. Let's go back. Just going to throw it out there for the jury. Just talk about caving in. Well, I was just very flattered. I was very vulnerable. I was very lonely. I'd had a very messy breakup. And these boys, they were so pestering of me to some degree when I look back on it, because I'm such a victim. And the truth is that they flattered me so much that in the end I caved into their advances. So they were the ones who were actually advancing on you. Yes, I was just an innocent victim of such advancement. Didn't you send one of them a puzzle that they had to solve so that they got your telephone number? Yes, but it was only because I'm a maths teacher and I wanted to give appropriate puzzles. But you did it so that you could then Snapchat him with explicit pictures. I didn't necessarily do any of those things, even though there is evidence that I did do those things, because I'm denying that any of that happened with boy A. And with boy B, those things happened, but he was definitely old enough, even though you're going to bring up information that suggests he wasn't old enough. And I'm just saying, I just caved in. I caved in. I mean, literally, she caved in to their advances. So she frames her actions as mistakes. I was making these mistakes during a very low period in my life. So she's not a predator. She's just really, really lonely and sad, which again, I think is a bad thing for the defence to have actually done, because anybody on the jury is listening to that and thinking, we've all been in those situations. We're not sexting kids because we feel sad. That's what predators do. Also, the defence, of course, challenged the prosecution's evidence, as they should, and they questioned the reliability and interpretation of the prosecution's evidence. So they argued that the presence of boy A's semen on Joynes's bedsheets could have had alternative explanations. What alternative explanations, I ask you? Was it possible that boy A had, I don't know, scaled the building, got into her home, gone into the bedroom, done something inappropriate to the bedsheets and left? Could it be that boy A's sheets had been taken to a local dry cleaners as hers had? They'd got mixed up, contaminated each other, and then, it ended up on her bed sheets? I mean, there are no other explanations. I've been around a long time. The only way that semen will end up on somebody's bed sheets is if the person who the semen has come from is present with the bed sheets. I mean, the idea that they're pushing that this didn't happen that way is ludicrous. Also, they said that those explicit messages on Snapchat, they were just part of playful but non-sexual interactions. I don't know about you guys. I mean, I'm married. Part of being married is I take a vow of faithfulness. I say, I am not going to have any kind of emotional or sexual connection with any other human being, because that would be considered adulterous. But I want to make it clear, the caveat is I can sext people, I can just chat explicitly with a range of strangers, because that's just playful. It's just playful interactions, it's non-sexual. If I came home and was like, I've just been, sexting one of my male friends, I hope you don't mind, my lovely husband, it wouldn't go well for me. It wouldn't go well. It would be definitely cited in the divorce papers. It's not playful, non-sexual interactions. When you're being explicit in your messaging, it's called explicit because it's explicit. But the defence basically aimed to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative, saying that the evidence was not as clear-cut as presented. Listen, it's clear-cut to a degree, but it's not as clear-cut as you're saying. What do you mean? Well, the messages are explicit. They're clear-cut explicit. But what we're saying is, even though they're clear-cut explicit, they're playful. But they're explicit, they're playful. They're playful even though they're explicit, but they're sexual in nature. They're playful nature. They're a playful kind of non-sexual, explicit, non-appropriate, but appropriate, nonsensical, because none of this is making sense to anybody in the jury. We're saying that at some point, if we just keep saying these words, you'll be like, oh, maybe it was just playful. Okay, is it the same with the semen? Is the semen something that was that was playful as well? That wasn't sexual. That was just, it was a playful experience that we can't explain, but we're saying it wasn't explicit. It definitely wasn't sexual. It probably wasn't even semen. It was like a semen-like stuff, but that we don't believe belonged to anybody at all. It didn't exist. We're saying it didn't exist, and all this is a mix-up. It was just a playful experience. That's what we're saying. I rest my case, Your Honour. Honestly, it's ludicrous. So this is what they are literally saying. They scrutinise these young people, which is also awful because they have to obviously give witness testimony, and that's very challenging. And the idea that they're basically saying that these boys are exaggerating, these boys are lying, they're distorting the truth, they're trying to seek attention, or they're trying to be retaliating in nature because they're upset about maybe how their relationship has gone. They basically try to undermine the credibility of the prosecution's key witnesses by literally highlighting and reinforcing those inconsistencies. Another thing the defence bring it in is that she had a really really supportive family background. They said she's got a really stable support system, and that they hoped would mitigate, I imagine, the portrayal of her as a manipulative individual. But unfortunately, really manipulative people are born to really good people. I do not doubt for 1 minute that her parents just think that this is a horrible mistake, and I totally feel sorry for them, because this is very common when people do not feel that somebody that they love desperately has this capacity, and they will stand by them till the end of time. They would burn in hell with them because they just fully believe that their child has not got this capacity, but unfortunately their child has, and they need her to take responsibility and accountability so that she can grow and change and maybe heal the fractures that makes her the human being that she is, and help her in the future when she does get out of prison, because she's going to go to prison, to maintain a decorum and a relational experience that is legal and acceptable. So the defence are basically saying that when it comes down to Rebecca Joynes, her experience and interactions with the boys were misguided attempts at finding emotional connection rather than deliberate exploitation, even though she got pregnant by one of the young men, these kids, who were just young teenagers, and somehow it's just misplaced. When it came down to the defence's conclusion, that whole premise was to just provide a counter-narrative to the prosecution's depiction of Joynes as a predatory teacher. They focused very much on her emotional vulnerability, the timing of her relationship with boy B, and of course challenging the prosecution's evidence and witness credibility. They wanted to create the all-important reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. But it won't surprise you, despite those valiant, if not ridiculous to some degree, efforts, Joynes was found guilty of 6 counts of sexual activity with a child, indicating that the jury 100% sided with the prosecution's arguments. Like I said, they put on a very strong show when it came down to the evidence. Now, when it came down to the sentencing and the verdict, Rebecca Joynes was found guilty of 6 counts of sexual activity with a child, including acts committed while in a position of trust. The guilty verdict came after a 2-week trial. It just took 9 hours of jury deliberation to actually come back with that guilty. Now, the specific length of her prison sentence hasn't been detailed as far yet, but she will face significant legal consequences, and that will include imprisonment. It will obviously include being barred from teaching and being barred from working with children for the rest of her natural life. Now, when Rebecca Joynes was found guilty of those multiple counts of sexual activity with the teenage students, she actually did have a very strong emotional reaction. So as the unanimous guilty verdicts were read out by the jury, she closed her eyes, she grimaced, she began to shake. And that reaction obviously indicates the intense emotional strain she's experiencing during the trial. Also, the fact that she now knows ultimately that she's going to be separated from her baby. And I don't know what ultimately will happen to the baby that she had with the boy that she was in a relationship with. Abusive, let's just make that clear, abusive relationship with. But having noted that, she will have a connection with her baby. And I cannot imagine how horrific it would feel to think that she's ultimately right now only allowed a certain amount of contact with that baby. That will be excruciating. But to go to prison and potentially lose a right to your child, that is going to be a really big punishment. And a lot of people will agree that it's a punishment that she deserves. But I would say that it adds another layer to her punishment. Now, the jury were composed of 7 men and 5 women. And as I said, they came back after deliberating for just over 1 day. So it was clearly a very strong prosecution case. Now, following the verdict, Judge Kate Cornell granted Joynes bail until her sentencing. So basically, she is free until she has that sentencing date, but she will know that every single day is a day working towards her freedom being removed. She was also warned that she'd face very severe consequences if she did anything such as try to skip the country. And the judge acknowledged the presence of her baby and also said that she was allowed to have another supervised contact date with her baby before she went to prison. I can't imagine how that will feel for Rebecca Joynes. And I know we're not affording her sympathy or empathy with what her actions are in the actual crime. And of course, she is complicit in where she is now. She has created this situation. But I think we can all allow a little bit of sympathy and empathy for the mother in her, who clearly loves her baby and will not be present in that child's life. When the jury brought in the verdicts, the actual parents showed no reaction when the verdict was read. And I guess that's because they have had to sit there listening to the evidence, that they probably knew that she was going to get a guilty verdict, and they probably didn't want to give the press any more than they'd already had, because they have constantly been following this case because it is so unusual and unique, and that means that it has felt like a media circus for the family. So I do understand why the parents chose to be stoic in that moment. When the judge read the statement about this case and was talking about how they felt to Rebecca Joynes, they made it clear and very emphatic the gravity of her actions. They did not show any compassion to her with respect. The judge agreed that she deserved a very decisive verdict from the court, condemned her for significant abuse of trust and authority as a teacher, and highlighted the profound impact of her actions on the lives of her victims, emphasising that she had exploited her position to initiate and sustain inappropriate relationships with minors. The judge also remarked on the betrayal of trust that Joynes' actions represented, not only towards the students, but also towards the educational institution that employed her. And that judge 100% underscored that Joynes had a duty of care towards her students, which she grossly violated, that she breached professional boundaries severely, and that she basically let down her whole profession as well as herself. The judge also noted that Joynes had used her own emotional vulnerability to manipulate the boys, and that manipulation included inappropriate communications and secret liaisons, which were not just ethically wrong, but also from the get-go legally criminal. And the judge emphasised that there was going to be a lasting emotional and psychological impact on the victims, that Joynes' actions were not just isolated incidents, but they were a pattern of behaviour that had a severe and lasting negative effect on the boys involved. And the judge went on to say that Joynes' efforts to maintain secrecy and her deceptive actions just demonstrated that she was fully aware of the wrongdoing and that she was attempting to avoid detection, and that this further aggravated her offences. And the judge went on to say, listen, you are going to prison. You're going to face significant legal consequences. It certainly warrants a substantial prison term because we need to reflect the seriousness of the crimes, and also to serve as a deterrent to others in positions of trust. And when it comes down to the amount of time that she's going to spend in prison, I do imagine that they are going to come down hard on her, because the world has been watching this case. The world has been watching this very attractive peaches and cream young woman who's just had a baby and essentially doesn't look like we imagine a predator will look, and hearing how far away from that look the reality of her actions are, because it just feels such a mismatch. How can you look like this, seem all these things that in our mind in society looks good, looks attractive, and yet be the absolute dark side when it comes down to your nature? It's challenging for us to cross that bridge. How can something that seems so appealing, so attractive, so stereotypically female, and then actually listen to the actions that paints a completely different picture around her nature? And this is where there have been so many discussions online that I've struggled with. People are saying things about those boys, those victims, as if they were somehow responsible, that they had a good time, that at the end of the day, who wouldn't want to sleep with her when they're 15 years of age? She's gorgeous, etc., etc., etc. And this is key. It is perfectly all right for young people to have sexual feelings towards adults. Perfectly. It happens all the time. That's why 13-year-old girls have pictures of Justin Bieber on their wall. It's why young boys have pictures of Madonna on their wall. It's how young people develop a sense of sexual interest. It's how they figure out what they like and dislike, and it's how they safely navigate the world of sex, because adults don't find them attractive when they're well adjusted and don't seek to harm them in a predatory way. It's the place that children can experiment without a fear of consequence. That's why young people are allowed to have all those feelings. It's perfectly all right for the 15-year-old boys in this to have thought, wow, Rebecca Joynes is fit and I want to have some kind of sexual liaison with her in their fantasy. That's their right, they're kids. But we draw the line and we separate the reality of that compared to her as an adult teacher trained and being somebody who's meant to protect children, breaching those boundaries and allowing those young men, those boys, to engage sexually with her when they were not in a position to consent. And the fact that people are so comfortable attacking the victims as if they were asking for it is an abandonment of our understanding about the safeguarding and the protective mechanisms that are required to look after the psychological, emotional, social and experiential well-being of children and of victims. And that's what we're talking about in this case, victims. If she had looked differently, like if she had looked like Vanessa George, so if you've ever seen my Vanessa George case, horrendous predator, she looks like a predator, that's what people say. So therefore it's far easier to cross that bridge and say, well, we can see that these kind of horrific female predators exist, and here we have evidence of one because she did this to these nursery children. Nobody has a problem painting her as a horrific predator because she looks a certain way. But when somebody looks stereotypically attractive and yet acts so bleakly in their behaviour, we instead try to levy all these more attractive qualities to them. Oh, she was vulnerable. Oh, she was just struggling. Oh, she was just isolated. Oh, she was just confused. Oh, she caved in to the victim's advances. And the minute that we accept that kind of language and belief system, we become predators too. We become abusers too. And so that's why it's so profoundly important that we step back from accepting that kind of language in our society and challenge those who peddle it. Because by peddling that narrative, we also push open the door for males to abuse children and use these kind of excuses if they're good looking. And for anybody who might be stereotypically attractive to act in ways that are absolutely distasteful, disgusting and illegal and get away with it because, hey, they're attractive. Or if you're struggling emotionally and you're lonely, well, hey, you can just go and abuse a kid because at the end of the day, you're just in a position where you need to feel that you're not quite as lonely as you were 10 minutes before you abused a child. This is why it's so powerfully important to call this kind of behaviour out. Rebecca Joynes is going to go to prison and she deserves to. I feel sorry for her family, I really do. I feel sorry for that baby because understandably the access to that child may end for even her family members. And that baby is a victim of this situation too. And without a doubt, you look at Rebecca Joynes and you look at her family and you realise that if she'd just gone down the normal route of having a typical relationship and having children with somebody her own age, her parents would have been unbelievably wonderful grandparents. I hope she changes, if that's possible. And I hope more than anything that those boys heal because they absolutely deserve to. They are victims, end of. This is a slightly different video today. I wanted to jump on just because I've been watching this case, I've been learning about it, and I just think it provokes a discussion and a dialogue about some really uneasy subjects that crop up when it is an attractive female predator. I'd love to know your thoughts. Please hit me up in the comments. Let me know how you feel. I'm going to try to do more of these. If you've enjoyed it, let me know because I need that reinforcement. I need you to let me know whether this is something that you want to see more of because I'm going to try to do more videos every single week and I'm going to try to react more to these kind of very modern cases as opposed to always doing ones that have got the whole picture completed with the sentencing, etc. I want to jump on and cover things that are happening in the press right now, not when they've already happened. Take care, guys. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you again next time.